Week number 8 of the 2025 fantasy football season is right around the corner. And this is a week where a lot of you guys are going to be dealing with a lot of teams on bye. The Lions, the Raiders, the Rams, the Cardinals, the Seahawks, and the Jaguars are on bye, meaning there are 6 total teams on bye this week. So it might be slim pickings at the wide receiver position this week. So in today's video, I'm going to help you guys set your lineup for week number 8 at the wide receiver position. We're going to go in depth through every single matchup from Thursday Night Football all the way up until Monday Night Football. And I'll be telling you guys whether I would start or sit the wide receivers in every single game, as well as where I believe they'll finish by the end of the week. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. We begin with Thursday Night Football, the cold like Minnesota Vikings at the Los Angeles Chargers. Justin Jefferson is a must-start top 12 wide receiver every single week for me. I fully understand that Carson Wentz is not trustworthy at all, but Justin Jefferson is too good to ever sit on your bench. Wide receiver 27 last week up against the Eagles with 5 receptions on 10 targets for 79 yards. Prior to the bye, he was a top 11 wide receiver in back-to-back games in PPR. I get at this point in the season, there are definitely reasons to be worried about Justin Jefferson, and I'm not going to pretend like I am not at least a little bit nervous when I do play him, but at the end of the day, you are going to fire him up with supreme confidence, even in a tougher matchup on paper against the Chargers, who are the 26th ranked matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. He still needs to be in your lineup. I want a bad bitch. Jordan Addison-Ray has been balling ever since returning from his wet reckless charge. 3 straight games as a top 21 wide receiver in PPR. And while Justin Jefferson has been bouncing all around, Addison has been very consistent. Deep down, I know that the down game is coming, as Carson Wentz looked like he needed a cane to walk around and wear sunglasses all the time. But at the end of the day, even though this is a rough matchup, when a guy has played as well as Addison in 3 straight showings, I will rock with him as a low-end wide receiver too. For Jalen Nailor, I know there are 6 teams on bye this week, but you should not need to resort to having Nailor in your lineup regardless. The wide receiver 3 on a Carson Wentz offense is unstartable in 2025. For the LA Superchargers, you are firing up all of the wide receivers. With the offensive line banged up for the Chargers, the team has been spamming the Lad McConkey button. 15 targets last week against the Colts with 9 receptions for 67 yards. 3 straight top 20 showings for the Lad. This is the 29th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis. But again, when guys are playing as well as Lad McConkey, you want to keep rocking with them as a high-end wide receiver too. Keenan Allen broke his 3-game slump last week up against the Colts. 11 receptions on 14 targets for 119 yards and a score as the wide receiver 3 in a matchup where the Chargers got raw dogged and scored a bunch of their points in garbage time. But hey, the points still count and we can't take them away from them. The upside in any given matchup for Keenan is exactly what we saw last week. Again, I get the matchup is rough, but you got to keep playing Keenan as a low-end wide receiver too. For Quentin Johnston, this was the lowest scoring Chargers wide receiver last week as the wide receiver 30. Much like Keenan Allen, though, he did find the end zone. 2 receptions on 6 targets for 30 yards and a score. One of these dudes most weeks will end up being a bust, and you will wish you had the other 2 guys. But with how good the Chargers offense can look on a weekly basis, and with how much they throw the ball, QJ is also in the low-end wide receiver 2 range. Now we move to the Sunday 1 p.m. slate. No morning game this week. You don't have to wake up at the ass crack of dawn. We got the Miami Dolphins at the hot Atlanta Falcons. Jaylen waddled away, waddle, got locked up, don't let me out. Akon style up against the Browns last week in Cleveland. Awful weather for him, really did him no favors at all. And despite the fact that the Dolphins decided to just ignore the weather and just throw all that much through the wind, Waddle had just 1 catch on 4 targets for 15 yards, the wide receiver number 90. Ultimately, that wasn't all that shocking. What was shocking was that Tua force-fed the rock to the defense all game long. I mean, guys like Jaylen Waddle are just wide open. There is no one even remotely near him. There is no one in the same school zone as Jaylen Waddle, and Tua's just throwing the ball to the defense. It is truly shocking that the guy can play so well up against the Chargers, the Patriots, the Bills. And then when we go up against the Browns, he looks like he was fucking blindfolded doing the Bird Box challenge. And at the end of the day, I will just try to brush last week off, throw it under the rug. Hey, don't worry about it. The 2 prior games without Tyreek, he was a top 18 wide receiver in back-to-back games. I do think that maybe the team has tapped out. They may have given up, and that does worry me, but Waddle seems like he still cares, so hopefully even in a rough matchup up against the Falcons, who allowed the 31st most points to wide receivers on a per-game basis, Waddle is a fine low-end wide receiver 2 to high-end wide receiver 3. Malik Washington saw his highest amount of targets on the season last week, while the Dolphins were getting their backs blown out in Cleveland. 5 receptions on 8 targets for 30 yards, but with how Tua Tagovailoa looks, though, and with how bad this matchup is on paper, even with 6 teams on bye, I would not feel comfortable playing him. Not starting the wide receiver 3 on the Miami Dolphins, even in the most dire of scenarios. Can't even guarantee Nick Westbrook-Ikhine scores a singular point. So he will not be in my lineup. For the Atlanta Falcons, Drizzy Drake London screwed the pooch last week, as did the whole Falcons offense outside of Bijan Robinson in prime time. London still had 10 targets, though, for 4 receptions and 52 yards as the wide receiver 39. So while it wasn't what I or what anyone wanted, there is still something to be said about how many targets he commands. 10 plus targets now in 3 straight games. And the 2 prior games, he was a top 5 wide receiver in both showings. So facing a Dolphins defense that is nothing short of ass, shout out to Natasha Nice, I expect London to bounce back in a big way as a top 10 option. Darnell, here comes the Mooney, led the wide receiver corp in receiving yards on Sunday Night Football against the Niners with 3 receptions on 5 targets for 68 yards. I don't think anyone should be fiending to throw Darnell Mooney in their lineup, but again, with so many teams on bye and with a good matchup, I think Mooney should be good enough to sit in the dart throw YOLO wide receiver 4 start range, especially when you consider he has a game this season with 11 targets. Davis Sills, Ray McLeod has been released, so one of Kaderil Hodge, Casey Washington, or Davis Sills will be the wide receiver 3 option, and my best guess would be that it is Sills. But with both London and Mooney healthy, I don't think you can make any argument to roster or play any of these guys. Next up, we got the New York Jumbo Jets at the Cincinnati Bengals. The exact point I brought up earlier about Justin Jefferson is the exact same thing I've said all season about Jamar Chase ever since Joe Burrow ended up getting hurt. While there is a clear drop-off from Burrow to Jake Browning or to Joe Flacco, even with worse quarterback play, Jamar Chase is a freak of nature and can go off even if you or I was the starting quarterback for the Bengals. Chase himself is on an absolute heater right now. 1 game with Jake Browning and the last 2 with cool Joe Flacco as a top 5 wide receiver in all games. This man had 23 fucking targets last week. Shout out to Michael Jordan. This dude had 16 receptions on those 23 targets for 161 yards and a touchdown. Joe Flacco cracked the code, which is just, F it, Jamar Chase is out there somewhere. The Tua to Tyreek special against a Jets defense that is the 23rd best matchup for wide receivers. I don't care much about the matchup. This is Jamar Chase we're talking about. I got him as a locked and loaded top 3 option. He is my wide receiver number 1. Tee Higgins had his best game of the season against the Steelers last week in a showing that I expected to be more of a common occurrence this season, but obviously with Joe Burrow going down, that seems very unlikely. Wide receiver 13 with 6 receptions on 10 targets for 96 yards and a score, and he could have had a second touchdown, but he ended up sliding to drip down the clock. Tee Higgins is a lower end on the totem pole, though, compared to Jamar Chase, right? You're not going to see him get 23 targets this week, obviously. But with how well Joe Flacco has looked in both starts, and with Higgins being a top 28 wide receiver in both showings, I feel fine about ranking him as a mid-range wide receiver number 3. Andre Yoshi Voss, even with the Flaccos turning the Flaccos, like as if it's multiple, his whole fucking family turned the offense around, right? Even with Flacco turning this offense upside down, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air style, but in a positive way, you simply can't start a guy who may not even score 3 fantasy points, so you just leave him on the waivers. For the Jets, Garrett Wilson was not in practice today on Wednesday with the knee injury, and my assumption would be that he is out. Obviously, you can't speak in absolutes as only Siths do that, but on a Monday, or today's Wednesday, sometimes, get your days mixed up on a Wednesday. Shout out to the girl who plays Wednesday in Netflix. the Netflix show. I forgot what her name is. She was in Scream as well. She was great in that movie. If you guys have never seen the new Scream movies, those are very fun watches. Obviously, it's Halloween. But again, it's Wednesday, so I can't say, oh, it's a guarantee Garrett Wilson's out. But that, based on the injury, I don't think he would be very likely to play. If he does pull through and he's able to go, you're obviously going to play him as top 12 option. Any other non-Garrett Wilson wide receiver in this room is just essentially useless. Even without Garrett Wilson in this offense, it's just way too dreadful to even chance it playing any of them. If I had to guess who would score the most points, it would be Reynolds, who had 9 targets last week, but he turned those 9 targets into 3 receptions for 29 yards. So just no reason to play Allen Lazard, Tyler Johnson, or Josh Reynolds. Next up, we got the Cleveland Browns at the New England Patriots. Before we break down this game, though, in depth at the wide receiver position and the rest of the games on the slate for week number 8, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog, and sign up using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description, you'll get a free pick, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus funds, as well as if you are a first-time depositor to get all of these other things. If you play $5 in the pick'em, you will get an additional $100 in bonus funds or in bonus entries. How does the pick'em work on Underdog? It's incredibly simple. You make at least 2 picks on the players higher or lower. If those picks hit, you get paid. If you do multiple other picks, then the payout will be higher. But obviously, all of the picks have to hit, so make sure you guys do check that out. Promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. Now, Stefon Diggs bounced back last week in Tennessee after being a no-show in New Orleans the week prior. 7 receptions on 7 targets for 69 yards. Very nice, I like. Based on how this offense functions, one of these Patriots wide receivers is likely to be a top 24 option weekly with how good Drake May looks. But the problem here is it's definitely largely a guessing game due to how many wide receivers they utilize on a weekly basis. At the end of the day, though, the guy most likely to be consistent would be Stefon Diggs. I mean, he's by far and away the most talented, the best wide receiver in this offense with 7 or more targets in 3 of the last 4 games. In the 18th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis, Diggs is a solid low-end wide receiver too. Now, Kayshon Boutte is on fire NBA Jam style with 3 total touchdowns over the last 2 weeks and 1+ touchdown in each game in that stretch. Now, last week, he was 2 of 2 for 55 yards and a touchdown, and his targets bounce around very heavily weekly. So looking at him as like a safe bet would be very much foolish. But with how good Drake May has been playing, like we talked about with Stefon Diggs, and with how hot Boutte is running, he is a low-end wide receiver 3 dart throw option. Demario Douglas hasn't played over 30% of the snaps since week 3. He looks fine when he gets the ball, but with such a low snap share in the offense with a lot of cooks in the kitchen, I would not be comfortable rostering him or playing him. For the Cleveland Browns, Jerry Jeudy has just been dreadful this season since week 1, outside of that one good game, right? He has been a top 40 wide receiver in just 2 of 7 games and has fallen below 5 points in 3 of 7 games. I just really find it hard to get excited about Jerry Jeudy in a game with the lowest total on the week in terms of the Vegas projection by multiple points. Jeudy had 13 targets back in week 6 and turned that into 9.3 PPR points. His upside feels severely limited. His floor is also in the basement. And even if Dylan Gabriel's more fun to watch than cool Joe Flacco in this offense, I don't think he is good enough to elevate this passing attack outside of the tight ends when they're healthy. So with how things are sitting right now, no need to play Jeudy even in the 11th best matchup for wide receivers. Maybe Mr. Perfect Timing Shedeur Sanders could get in, or the massage man Deshaun Watson, and maybe that gives a boost to Jerry Jeudy, but right now I see no reason to play these guys. Isaiah Bond saw his snaps slashed to 44% last week, Chainsaw Massacre style, maybe due to the weather. Regardless, though, even if he clocks in as the wide receiver 2 on the Browns offense this week like he has been, I see 0 reason to play him. If I can't play Jeudy, I'm not playing Bond, and I'm not playing Jamari Thrash. Next up, we got the New York Football Giants at the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, Wandale Robinson, Mr. 305, has been playing well over the last 2 weeks as the offense as a whole has been. Back-to-back top 24 showings as the wide receiver 21. Can you do something for me? Last week was 6 receptions on 12 targets for 95 yards in Denver. in a embarrassing loss. I have talked about this multiple times, so I don't want to dance on the grave of Giants fans, right? If you were a Giants fan, you should be happy right now. You got your quarterback. You've got a fun, young running back, Cam Scatterbo. Malik Neighbors will be back next year, right? Everything's looking on the up and up for next season. Your kicker sucks ass. Your defense choked on a fat one. But ultimately, Wandale, Jackson Dart, Cam Scatterbo, they looked great last week. Last time out up against the Eagles in week 6, Wandale was the wide receiver 9 with 6 receptions on 7 targets for 87 yards and a touchdown in the 12th best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. I expect Wandale to keep up with his solid production as a low-end wide receiver number 2 in a game that has sneaky high-scoring upside. Now, little Jordan Humphrey, the Giants love the man with the Xbox gamer tag for a name. Little Jordan Humphrey, he played 96% of the snaps last week with 2 targets, and against the Eagles, he played 77% of the snaps, had 4 receptions on 8 targets for 55 yards. I think this matchup is interesting for him, but ultimately, even with 6 million wide receivers on bye this week, I don't feel good enough to play him given he had 0 receptions last week. Jalen Hyatt, I really don't want to play the guessing game here with the other wide receiver options outside of Wandale. If Slayton somehow plays, I don't even think I would feel good about playing him given he's coming off a hamstring injury. For the Philadelphia Eagles, A.J. Brown is on a heater. A.J. Brown is balling out of control over the last 2 weeks, and last week up against the Vikings in Minnesota, the dude exploded like a creeper in Minecraft. 4 receptions on 6 targets for 121 yards and 2 tugs, while A.J. Brown is more volatile than a meme coin in the 3rd best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. I am chomping at the bit to get A.J. Brown in my lineup. I get the risk is there, and that is much of the reason why I faded A.J. Brown this summer, but he's starting to catch fire. He's starting to play well. Shout out to Katniss Everdeen. I got him as a low-end wide receiver 1. Just like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith blew up last week as the wide receiver 2. 9 receptions on 11 targets for 183 yards and a touchdown. And just like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith is an incredibly risky asset week in and week out. We have a great matchup here, though, on paper up against the Giants. Last time out up against the Giants, he was just the wide receiver 37. So again, I do like to, tell you, hey, there's definitely big upside here. There's reasons to worry. And while I'm not 100% confident in Smith, and I don't think anyone is 100% confident in Devontae at this point, I still got him as a high-end wide receiver number 2. Jahan Dotson isn't even a guarantee to get more than a singular reception. Hadn't scored more than 10 points a single time this season, so he belongs to the streets on the waivers. Next up, we got the no one circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills at the Carolina Panthers. Now, last time out prior to the bye week for the Buffalo Bills, that offense was far from ideal. Josh Allen was on the struggle bus against the Falcons defense. Coming out the bye week, though, I do expect things to turn around here for the offense. On paper, this is a rough spot for Khalil Shakira with the 30th best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. But I think Shakir being a reliable wide receiver 3 asset, he will stay in the range regardless of the matchup. While I am never excited to have this guy in my lineup because I think his ceiling is capped and he's kind of just one of those sexless plays where the upside is limited, so you're never really going to win because of Khalil Shakir, but he's fine enough to go in your lineup as like a mid-range wide receiver number 3. I am so sick of Keon Coleman. I think he's a solid wide receiver, but his snaps are bouncing all around and his targets are just simply not predictable. I don't feel good to play him at all, especially when they utilize the tight ends so heavily. So since I expect them to be running the ball late, I don't think this is going to be a close game where Andy Dalton, the Red Rifles, keeping this one close. So the only wide receiver I feel good enough playing is Shakir, meaning you sit Elijah Moore and the rest of the Buffalo Bills wide receivers. Andy Dalton could help boost Tedero McMillan's value. Last week was a down performance with 3 receptions on 5 targets for 33 yards up against the Jets. Sauce Gardner had bro in chains. He was locked up in the 22nd best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. I do believe that Tedero McMillan should be able to bounce back. My best guess is that the team will be down, meaning that they have to throw the ball late, which should help Team Back elevate himself, raise the roof metaphorically, of course, to be a top 24 option this week. I got him as a mid-range wide receiver number 2. Xavier, somebody touch my leggett, popped off like baby no money last week with last week with 9 receptions on 11 targets for 92 yards and a touchdown. And while that was awesome to watch, I really just doubt we see that again, as I feel like T-Mac will be a much bigger piece of this offense this week. If you have to start Leggett, look, I understand that, you got to go with them. There's a gazillion teams on bye, right? There's worse options, but I just feel like the regression is going to slap you in the face, fucking Will Smith style. I'm not doing it. Jalen Coker returned to receive 2 targets on 37% of the snaps. They're clearly utilizing the just the tip approach, meaning they're easing them in, right? They're not shoving the whole thing up in there. So if they're going to keep easing him in, eventually he'll get more snaps, he'll get more targets, he'll be a guy you want in your lineup. But as of right now, there's no need to play him. Next up, we got the Chi-Town Bears, the Chicago Bears at the Baltimore Ravens. Now, Rome Odunze, another one of these guys that has been on the struggle bus now in back-to-back weeks. He is basically the driver of the struggle bus, like it's Transit and Black Ops 2, with just 2 receptions in each game. He started off the season with 4 straight top 20 performances, though, so there really is no need to overwhelmingly panic and run away from Rome Odunze, be scared. Like last week, the Bears spammed the run button against the Saints, and I expect this game to be much closer against the Ravens to where they actually have to throw the ball. So on the 4th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis, Rome should be a top 8 option for me. DJ Moore has just been more disappointing this season than when your wife promises you a fun time at night and then she ends up being too tired or she's got a headache so she can't follow through. Just one game with over 10 points this season, so we shouldn't be expecting much at this point. In a great matchup, though, where the team should be throwing a ton, I am willing to give it a shot here as like a low end to mid-range wide receiver 3. I am not excited to play him at all, but again, with so many teams on bye, a guy like Moore, who has, normally would be a sit if there was just like 4 teams on bye, he becomes a start this week. Olamide Zacchaeus, his role in this offense is basically just hold door, just holding back Luther Burden from seeing a legitimate workload. No one should be starting him or having him on the roster. With Lamar Jackson back at practice today, and my assumption that he was going to play after missing a few games with the hamstring injury, and they would bring him back. And again, this team is just straight up ass without him. Shout out to Mia Malkova. So they just have to bring him back. Flowers has been mid without Lamar, but I think getting Lamar back will basically pack a punch Zay Flowers' value and bring his upside back. So with the 9th best matchup on wide receivers for a per game basis on paper in what is expected to be the 2nd highest scoring game of the week, I like Flowers as a high-end wide receiver number 2. Rashad Master Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins, all these other guys, the non-Zay Flowers wide receivers should see a boost with Lamar Jackson back, but with zero flow to which guy is actually the wide receiver 2 on a weekly basis for fantasy. Maybe D-Hop gets back to the early days of the season where he's just scoring touchdowns left and right. There's just too much of a guessing game at play here to start any of them. Then we move to the San Francisco 49ers at the Houston Texans. Christian Kirk is banged up and not at practice. Nico Collins is dealing with a concussion and not at practice. This should elevate Jalen Noel to become the wide receiver 1 in this offense. 4 receptions on 7 targets for 77 yards. I get the Texans offense absolutely reeks, and CJ Stroud doesn't look good, and the offensive line is about as useful as a paintball gun during a shootout. Noel should get peppered here. I think the floor is still very low, but the upside is good enough for him to be a YOLO wide receiver 4 start. The rest of the guys, though, anyone outside of Jalen Noel without Collins cannot be trusted. The offense makes me want to fucking throw up, so I'm not risking playing any of these other guys. At this point, I do not feel good for 49ers wide receiver Ricky Pearsall returning. He has now been out 3 straight games with a knee injury. The reports haven't sounded the most positive either. But we all know trusting what Kyle Shanahan says is like trusting a fart after you ate a bunch of Taco Bell at midnight after you've been drinking a bunch. It could be a bad time. If Ricky plays, I would play him in the wide receiver 3 range, despite the matchup being rough up against the Texans. Bourne should operate as the wide receiver 1 in this offense if this is the case. Only seeing 2 targets last week, though, again, in a rough matchup, it does feel very, very risky. Mid-range wide receiver 3. I do expect Mac Jones to start again. But, like, that's the report. but you never really seem to get anything super duper official from the 49ers. Juwan Jennings is a desperation YOLO wide receiver 4 start. I do not trust him at all. And the guy is playing through a million injuries, though he did have 7 targets last week up against Atlanta with 4 receptions for 31 yards. I do not love him by any means, but he's involved enough in this offense to potentially peak. So with all the buys, he's a fine wide receiver 4 YOLO type of start. DeMarcus Robinson is live to not see a single reception this week. He would be a clear sit. Now we move to the 4 o'clock slated games, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New Orleans Saints. If you guys have enjoyed today's video thus far, please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below. It does help me out a ton. For the Buccaneers, Emeka Egbuka shockingly returned last week up against the Lions in Detroit, coming off a hamstring injury that occurred just a week prior. Egbuka was 4 of 12 for 58 yards, the wide receiver 33. Baker Mayfield also looked terrible last week, just missing dudes who were wide open, with most of those throws being ones that you would expect a guy like Baker Mayfield to make. With Egbuka's track record this season, one down game where the Buccaneers were just down astronomical as a whole, Egbuka not smashing is okay. We don't need to panic. I expect him to bounce back in a massive way. Shout out to Ninja. In the 15th best matchup on a per game basis for wide receivers is a must start top 8 option for me on the week. With Mike Evans now out for majority, if not the rest of the season, maybe he plays like 3 games and somehow gets 400 yards a game to break that 1,000 receiving yards number. Tez Johnson will continue to see more work in the Buccaneers offense. 65+% of the snaps in back-to-back games, 10+ points in 3 straight games, and a touchdown in back-to-back showings. Last week, he was the wide receiver 18 with 4 receptions on 9 targets for 58 yards and a touchdown. I still view him as more of a boom or bust option due to him not having a solidified target share in this offense, but it would seem that Baker likes him more than Sterling Shepard, so Tez Johnson is in that YOLO wide receiver 4 fringe start range. For Sterling Shepard, he has been outsnapped now by Tez Johnson in back-to-back games. He had 7 of 7 last week for 25 yards. Knowing the team will likely be winning this game and not be down by a zillion like last week up against the Lions, I think Shepard's target should fall, so I would prefer to sit him. For the Saints, Chris Olave has been spitting hot fire like Bowser over the last 2 weeks. 5 receptions on 7 targets for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns, his best game of the season. The week prior is the wide receiver 18 up against the Patriots. While I still have ultimately 0 trust in Spencer Rattler getting this guy multiple touchdowns again this season, he does see enough volume for it to be possible. In the 19th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis, with so many targets coming his way, I got him as a low-end wide receiver 1 to high-end wide receiver number 2. I'm Shaheed. Rashid Shaheed continues to just be disappointing. Now, the upside is always there due to his big play upside, meaning this is a guy that could take a ball straight to the crib. This is a guy that could just burst past a DB and burst past the safety, get thrown up a prayer from Spencer Rattler, catch it, be wide open, run 90 yards into the end zone, right? We know that is possible, but with fewer than 10 points in 5 of 7 games, in a mid-range matchup with Rattler under center, and with Olave just sucking in so many targets, I don't trust him. Cook gets 1 target a week over the last 3 weeks. He should not be owned. Now we got the game of the week, in my opinion, the Dallas Cowboys at the Denver Broncos. CeeDee Lamb returns, and shocker, he is incredibly good. Wide receiver 11 up against the Commanders last week with 5 receptions on 8 targets for 110 yards and a touchdown with Dak Prescott on fire. You have to keep rocking with these pass catchers. I understand this is the worst matchup for wide receivers every week, but when an offense is soaring and flying, shout out to Troy Bolton, when an offense is playing as well as the Dallas Cowboys, I am not overreacting against the Broncos. I am playing him. CeeDee is a top 5 wide receiver for me on the week. Now, George Pickens may see some Patrick Surtain in this game, and while that does sound shivers down your spine like the spooky, scary skeletons on Halloween, and while this matchup is tougher than a well-done steak, this offense is scorching hot, and George Pickens is a big part of that. Even with Lamb back in the fold, I can 100% see Pickens as the wide receiver 1 overall in a game that should be as high scoring as this one. And with the matchup having the highest total of the week, you are starting all of your Cowboys. Pickens is a high-end wide receiver number 2. Jalen Tolbert. The Cowboys have 3 wide receivers that could end up operating as the wide receiver 3 in terms of targets in any given game. And with Lamb now back and Jake Ferguson getting as many targets as he does, there's no need to play, who's the wide receiver 3 of the Cowboys? Let's try to figure that out so we can start them, right? That's just like a very, very, very risky thing, even in a high-scoring game environment, so I would sit them all. For the Denver Broncos, Courtland Sutton is probably going to sleep with a hard-on all week, just knowing that the Cowboys' defense's legs are wide open for the taking. This is the best matchup on a per-game basis for wide receivers. Sutton has been largely boom or bust this season. With that said, we have seen mostly booms, 5 of 7 games inside the top 17, with the other games have been super mega ash. Shout out to Lena the Plug with 1.6 and 2.7 PPR points in those showings. In this matchup, I love Sutton as a top 6 option. With such a good matchup here, I'm willing to take the shot on Troy Franklin, the fucking full court, heave it up and hope it goes in. He is by no means a safe option, is more of the kind of fuck it, YOLO, wide receiver 4 range type of guy. But with the matchup being Swiss cheese, I do think the upside is very clear here. 3 receptions on 10 targets for 19 yards and a score last week up against the G-Men in that crazy comeback win. Again, wide receiver 26. The floor is very, very, very low, but the upside alone is enough to kind of maybe squeak him into your lineup again with so many teams on bye. Like, this is just a week where a lot of you guys might just have to throw anything into your lineup and just pray to the football gods above that it works. Marvin Mimsy had a great game last week in that insane comeback in the fourth quarter. 6 receptions on 7 targets for 85 yards and 1 rush for 13 yards. The biggest difference here between Mims and Franklin, and why I am willing to play Franklin and not Mims, is the snaps. Franklin has been the clear wide receiver 2 in terms of snaps every single week this season, and Mims, who played under 40% of the snaps in weeks 5 and 6, peaked with 53% last week. I just don't see that being as likely, so I would just prefer to leave him on the waiver wire. Then we got the Tennessee Titans at the Indianapolis Colts. Alec Iomanner is another one of those YOLO wide receiver 4 dart throw start range type of guys. Facing the Colts is a great matchup. It's the second best matchup for wide receivers. But the problem here is that the Titans offense is nothing short of trash. The firing of Brian Callahan didn't do anything. It didn't do anything. It didn't give them even a slight ounce of life, right? The upside is high, but the ceiling is in the basement. So if you're looking for someone that's like safe, this is not your guy. You're not that guy, pal. Trust me, you're not that guy, as I want nothing to do with the Titans offense. But if you're in a break a glass in case of emergency start range, fire up Iomanner. Again, YOLO wide receiver 4 type of guy. For the rest of the guys, Shamir Dyke popped off as the wide receiver 16 last week against the Patriots, going 4 for 4 like he was at Wendy's for 70 yards and a touchdown. Again, the Titans offense is far too dreadful for me to even consider starting a guy like Dyke, who doesn't even play over 60% of the snaps. They got rid of Lockett, so maybe more of the chips are pushed these guys' way. But again, when your quarterback looks like he can't even fucking read a Dr. Seuss book on the weekly, that also means you aren't going to start Van Jefferson either. For the, this is our Colts, this is our team, we bleed blue. This is our Colts, whether win or lose, we love them. Shout out to Seth, shout out to Danny Dimes, and shout out to Michael Pittman Jr., who is another one of these guys like Sutton, who is just the textbook definition of boom or bust. If you have an old school dictionary, I have like 8 million of them. My grandma had 1 million of them, so I got them. They're in the closet, and those things are huge, by the way. I have like 18 million dictionaries. You go up, you find your Webster's dictionary, because everyone has one, right? Why wouldn't you have one, right? The internet doesn't exist, right? And you look up boom or bust, you'll be like, wow, I think that guy looks familiar. There's a picture of someone. It's Michael Pittman Jr., right? Michael Pittman Jr. either finishes as a top 22 wide receiver or finishes outside of the top 60. Last week was one of his boom games up against the Chargers. 7 receptions on 9 targets for 58 yards and a touchdown. This week in the 13th best matchup for wide receivers in a per-game basis, I am expecting a boom showing here. I got Pittman as a low-end wide receiver number 1. Josh Downs practiced on Wednesday with his concussion. He is still in the league to concussion protocol, but is practicing today, and that is a good indicator that he has the chance to play here on Sunday. He missed last week, so while I am as much of a doctor as Johnny Sins, I feel like after one missed game with the concussion, we typically see the player return unless it's like a crazy concussion, like something that happened to Tua a couple of years ago. This should slot Downs in as the wide receiver 2 on this offense, ahead of Alec Pierce, who was the wide receiver 22 last week. So with the matchup being solid and with the Colts offense playing as well as possible, Josh Downs is a solid mid-range wide receiver 3 start. Assuming that Josh Downs is back this week, Alec Pierce should go back to your bench even with a good performance last week. Now we move to "'Cause you waited all day for Sunday night." The Green Bay Packers at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Romeo Doubs continues to be the wide receiver 1 on the Packers offense. 8+ targets in 3 straight games. Packers at Steelers. I think I just sung the Sunday Night Football song and forgot to tell you who's in the game, even though I know you guys are looking at the screen so you can see it. The revenge game for Aaron Rodgers, right? Romeo Doubs is the wide receiver 1 on the Packers offense. I know they don't technically really utilize a wide receiver 1, but if you were to categorize one guy as the wide receiver 1, it would be Doubs, who's had 8+ targets in 3 straight games, with all games inside the top 30. Doubs did have his best game of the season against the Cowboys a few weeks ago prior to the bye with 3 touchdowns, and I don't see that happening again. But if there ever was a game for him to unlock that greatness again, it would be up against the Steelers, who are the 6th best matchup for wide receivers. That just got lit up like a Christmas tree by Jamar Chase. Now, I know Nick, Romeo Doubs, and Jamar Chase are not even close to the same player. No shit, okay? Obviously, right? He is a million rungs below Jamar Chase, but this is a good matchup on paper, so Doubs is a solid high-end wide receiver 3 option. Matthew Golden Scar feels like he is knocking on the door of that big game, and this could be the matchup where the good game is coming. He has been a lot more reliable recently, and while he is still far from like the perfect option, with so many wide receivers on bye, a guy like Matthew Golden can be leaned on like that Major Lazer and DJ Snake song as a mid-range wide receiver number 3. Dontavian John Wicks, even with Christian Watson potentially returning, I do think this like Jalen Coker, right? Where you ease him in, right? You don't go all the way in, fucking Christian Watson getting a gazillion snaps in week 1. I think they kind of ease him in off Jump Street. Wicks should get like 2+ targets, so there's nothing exciting in order to actually start him. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, DK Metcalf was a massive disappointment last week up against the Bengals in Cincinnati on Thursday Night Football. After back-to-back top 10 showings, Metcalf was just 3 of 5 last week for 50 yards. Rodgers did look great, though, and given this is a Rodgers revenge game, I do expect Metcalf to get fed heavily in the 16th best matchup for wide receivers. So with Metcalf being a touchdown machine, scoring a touchdown in 4 of 6 games, this week I got him as a low-end wide receiver 1 to high-end wide receiver number 2. Mike Tomlin said yesterday that he's optimistic that Calvin Austin III could return to practice this week with the shoulder injury. If he plays, I would not play him. It's just another scenario where I don't trust anyone outside of the wide receiver 1 on this team. Now we move to "'Cause you waited all day for Monday night," even though that's not the theme song. Monday Night Football, dun. The left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders at the Kansas City Chiefs in Arrowhead. Dan Quinn says Debo with the heel and Terry McLaurin with the quad are both practicing fully this week before Monday Night Football. Debo missed last week's juicy matchup up against the Cowboys, which sucked, as he probably would have put belt to ass in that game if he is able to go. Jaden Daniels being out is definitely a downgrade, and the matchup here is definitely tough up against the Chiefs, but Debo has been so good this season. This should be a guy that should be able to finish as a mid-range wide receiver 2, even with Marcus Mariota. When Terry McLaurin has been healthy, he's been struggling this season. He hasn't been so bad to where he's like not in consideration at all to play him, but we haven't seen what a lot of you guys would have expected this year. He was a guy that was a fade for me this summer. He wasn't, getting that contract. And when you don't sign the contract until later on into the summer, we saw it with CeeDee Lamb last year. It really inhibits your ability to get that connection with your quarterback. And we saw that this season. Now, again, it's week 8. He's only played a couple of games. No Jaden Daniels. It's Marcus Mariota. Again, he's like fine. And like he's fine. He's been fine enough to like overcome this all. But we haven't seen anything this season that would make me feel confident ranking him anywhere outside of like, being a low-end wide receiver number 3. Jalen, stay in your lane. Luke McCaffrey absolutely face-fucked us last week. If you gave him a shot up against the Cowboys, if Terry and Debo are back, like what Dan Quinn is alleging, don't play the guessing game here with the alternate Commanders wide receivers. Jalen Lane would have been the guy to start last week. For the Kansas City Chiefs, Rashee Rice made his triumphant return from his 6-game suspension. And not only is this man fast off the field, and that's, why he was suspended, he is a speed demon on the field. And he came out the gate at Usain Bolt speed, wide receiver 10 with 7 receptions on 10 targets for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns, while only playing 41% of the snaps up against the Las Vegas Raiders because the team was up by so much they benched everyone in the third quarter because they were walking the Raiders like a dog and didn't even need Mahomes to finish the game, with Rice being exactly what I said he would be all summer long, the clear wide receiver number 1 in this offense. In the 10th best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis, Rashee Rice is a clear must-start top 5 option. Professor Xavier Worthy was on the struggle bus last week up against the Raiders. While Rashee Rice was racking up fantasy points, Xavier Worthy was pushed into the cuck corner. 3 receptions on 4 targets for 36 yards and 1 rush for 13 yards. But it's important to note that that game, again, was a certified blowout. And at no point were the Raiders even in the game. So if this game could be at least remotely competitive, we should see Rashee Rice have that great game and Xavier Worthy get more usage. So with Rice back in the fold, the risk of Worthy has definitely gone up, and we talked about that last week, but the upside is still top 10 in any given matchup with how good Mahomes this offense has been looking, and especially in a great matchup up against the Commanders, I got him as a low-end wide receiver number 2. Hollywood Brown joined in on the touchdown scoring front last week with 2 receptions on 4 targets for 14 yards and a touchdown, though most weeks he is going to be so far lower down the totem pole in this offense for that to not be very likely to happen. So for me, I would just feel it's best to leave him on your bench. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. Make sure that if you are new to the channel or not, leave a like on today's video. Check out on the screen, the videos on your screen if you haven't seen already. Check out the Patreon, link in the video description to get my rankings and to get all of your questions answered for $12.50 a month. Love you guys so much. Hope you have a great one. As always, good boy.